So, thank you. So welcome everyone. And I don't see any, hi Mim. I see one person and Kyla too, two people who know Hebrew. So maybe the next question will be easier for you to answer. Let's start with the title of the book. And by the way, just to see how American publishing house sees their book and how Israelis do. Oh, Mike, can you come to my screen, please? We just came back from the demonstration, so I want you guys to see. I'm wearing the same shirt, but he's standing, so you can see the shirt. Okay, so when
we can get them for anybody who wants them.
That's true. That's true. So the name is a trumpet in the Wadi, and which Wadi are we talking about? Everybody remembers?
It's Haifa.
It's a Wadi in Haifa. It's in the north, western part of the city, very close to the bay. It's called Wadi Nisnas. Nisnas is a mungus in Arabic. Maybe there were some animals living there when they started it. It was built in the 19th century for working class, primarily Arabs. And in 1948, when after the Independence War, only Arabs lived in the Wadi. In the book, which takes place in 1982, it's already a mix, some kinds of a mixed neighborhood. So that's the Wadi. Now let's look at the trumpet. So of course, trumpet is a very ancient musical instrument, and it was used as a signaling device in battles and in hunting, and also it's mentioned in the Bible in religious services. But trumpet in Hebrew has another meaning. Anybody know what the meaning is? Fallopian tube. Yeah. And those who really want to extenuate say the trumpet of the uterus, but it's called the trumpet. That's how our sexual parts were named. But the trumpet in this book has two other relationships to literature, and it's more than just literary allusions. It's what literary researcher called intertextuality. So the writer of one book really communicates and relates to the text of another literary writing. The first one has the names throughout the book, and this is Yehuda Amichai, the poet Yehuda Amichai. In 1982, Amichai published a collection of poems called Shat HaChesed. It could be translated as an hour of grace, or sometimes an hour in Hebrew is an undefined short period of time, or moments of grace. Hi, everyone who just joined. We had to start on time because we have a lot to talk about. And in this collection was a poem called Virgin Eyes. And it tells, there's a scene in the poem about a trumpet player in a public park. And Yehuda Amichai says, and I'll read it in Hebrew first. I couldn't find a good literary translation in English. Lots I couldn't find either. והכרתי את האיש המנגן בחצוצרה, and I knew, or I was familiar with the man who was playing the trumpet, כשם שהכרתי את הכאב הישן. The same way I was familiar with or I recognized the old pain. So the old pain relates, of course, to Alex, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. So this is one literary allusion. The other one relates to Chaim Nachman Bialik, who wrote a short story published in 1917 called Hachatzotzra Nidbaisha, The Trumpet Was Ashamed. And it's a story about a very generous family in Russia who was evicted from their house and businesses and farm on Friday afternoon, mere hours before the beginning of the Passover Seder. And this was, of course, the order of the Russian officials. The family was joined by their older son, who was conscripted into the Tsar's army. And he was a player in the band in the army. So he brought his trumpet with him. And the trumpet in Bialik's book is a clue to how Jewish scholars and Jewish people who belong to the Haskalah was the Jewish enlightening movement. Mir, you were saying something? I can't hear you. You're muted.
No, I just said enlightenment.
Enlightenment. Thank you. Thank you for the correction. And it was a clue to the people who belonged to that movement wanted to assimilate into the world around them. And playing something, if they played the fiddle, if they played the violin, this was considered a Jewish instrument. But to play the trumpet was really a clue of how you can do something like all the other nations. And the youngest son, because the family was evicted, the youngest son was never able to hear the sound of the trumpet. And as Bialik ended the story, he said, the trumpet never dared to come out and sound its call. The trumpet was ashamed. So Sami Michael, who's a major writer in the Israeli canon, was able to bring all those relationships at the very beginning, just into the title. So what is the role of the trumpet in the novel? Anybody wants to help us discuss?
It's Alex's mouthpiece, the way he expresses himself non-verbally.
Right, because his Hebrew is so limited, so he expresses himself through his trumpet. What else?
I would say it's his way of luring Huda. I mean,
Right.
it's a love song. And
Right.
she is touched to the soul by the music.
Right. She's awakening by the sound of the trumpet. What else? Remember what Jamila, the neighbor, said about the trumpet? Let's go.
It's luring the cast.
Yes, let's go to, now since I have the paper cover, we'll all be on the same page. Chapter 16, page 164. Um, 164, she says, let's see. Why can I not find it?
It's it's the biggest paragraph from the top, like 3-6.
Right, but let's start, thank you. It's the second paragraph, and it's in the middle, like, she turned to him. Luther, do you have it? Just the next sentence. Luther, you muted.
I am not muted now.
Oh, thank you.
You want mischievous glint?
No, just from she turned to him.
You! She turned to him. His trumpet! I swear to you, he has bewitched her. You ever heard of a cat being drawn to a trumpet? Now he's bewitched our Huda.
Right. Thank you. So the trumpet has a magical role. And in ancient time, people really believed that the trumpet has some magical powers. What other roles does the trumpet play in the book? Think about the poem I just told you that Amichai wrote. Alex expresses his pain through the trumpet, right? The pain of his awful childhood in an orphanage, in a Russian orphanage, the pain of losing his lover, leaving her in in Russia behind when he immigrated to Israel. And the pain of being a new immigrant with a broken language, unable to fit in, having to live on a tiny roof on the deck, on the room on the roof. It's all expressed through his trumpet. What else? There's also the cruel uprooting, just like with the shamed trumpet. Alex was uprooted from his surrounding, from his family. His parents later came, but from his environment, from the place he grew up with. And he said later on, he said, I cannot go to another country. It's enough for me to stutter in one language. How many languages can I stutter? Can I not speak well in? Carol said before that he talks to Huda through it, his relationship, okay? I mean, he talks not just to Huda through the trumpet, he also talks to the grandpa, to Elias, and even to Huda's mother. All of those people somehow find something in the music that they can relate and communicate with Alex. What other roles? There's something pretty profound. Think about the nickname that they give him.
Diane has her hand raised.
Yes, Diane.
Yes, I think at the end, the fact that his mother gets the trumpet indicates a big loss.
Absolutely, absolutely. What happens at the very end is just like the end in Bialik's story. The mother confiscated it. The trumpet will never sound its voice again, its sound again, right? But at the same time that the mother confiscated the trumpet, Huda is pregnant with the child. And remember what I told you in Hebrew? It's the uterus, it's the trumpet of the uterus. So Huda has it. But what I was looking at, and this was perfect what you just said, when I was looking at the nickname, Alex was nicknamed Abu Trumpet. Does everybody know about the tradition of calling parents over by the name of the children in the Arab world? Some people know. It's very much so in Judaism. What is the purpose of a couple in life, according to our tradition, according to the Bible? The purpose is to have progeny, right? This is the first command that we were giving, and the same goes to the in the Arab world. So the most important thing for a person, whether a male or female, is to have children and to honor their status in life of being parents. You call them, you forget the name. Supposedly, my Arabic name is Hayat, okay? But nobody who knows me will call me Hayat. They will call me Ifat, the mother of Ifat. So we don't know, for instance, what's the name of the mother of the girls, right? We know Huda's name and we know Mary's name, but what's the mother's name? Because everybody calls them Huda. Huda is the oldest daughter, and she was the one who was giving her mother the name, the new status of being a mother. So the funny thing is that this nickname was given by the lawyer who was the nephew of the neighbor Jamila. But Mary, the younger sister, really loved it, and she was the one who made use of it a lot. So here is Alex giving this new status of being a father even before Huda became pregnant. And another thing about Diane, what she said about confiscating the trumpet at the end, it's a metaphor of the lack of coexistence, because by silencing the trumpet and by having the father of the trumpet killed in the war, we lost the Jewish partner. We have the Arab partner. We have Huda with the child, but we lost the Jewish partner. Okay, so that's a lot about the name of the book. What's the genre in this novel? Yes, Susan. Hi.
The one thing, maybe, I'm sorry, I joined you late, so maybe you
Okay.
have already discussed it, but
Yeah.
the trumpet, Mary makes a joke that Huda lost her virginity to the trumpet.
Yeah.
You already talked about that? Okay.
No. I mean, Carol said that the trumpet is Alex's mouthpiece. I mean, it's Alex. It's another reincarnation of Alex. Yeah. But so what's the genre? In this case, it's quite important. Okay, the obvious thing is that it's a realistic story. Yeah, yes, Diane.
No, I was going to say the obvious thing, a love story.
Yeah, but the genre is realistic. However, the book is actually a coming of age book. And traditionally, a coming of age book is young people who, who develop and they focus on the psychological and moral growth. And traditionally, it goes from childhood maybe to adulthood. It doesn't necessarily have to be here like this. Huda went through an educational process, and for her, it was coming of age. And any coming of age famous books that you can throw from the top of your head? Anyone?
Anne Frank.
Okay.
Catcher in the Rye.
I'm sorry?
Catcher in the Rye.
Of course, yes. What else?
The James Joyce Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man.
Yes. Something more 21st century, very famous. Harry Potter. Of course, but David Copperfield and Jane Eyre and the other books by the Bronte sister. I mean, there's so many coming of age, and they're all very different. But in the essence of it is of a person undergoing such a profound change and learning and growing that it impacts not just himself, but it impacts the people around him. Okay, Luther, you want to tell us a little bit about Sami Michael?
Yes, I'll try to tell you a little bit, but there is a lot to tell about Sami Michael. He's a very accomplished author. He was born in Baghdad in 1926 to a secular Jewish family. He, at a young age, joined a leftist underground group. Well, really, they were communists, and so he was a activist from very early on. He wrote for a communist paper that was being published in Baghdad, and that certainly the authorities were not very happy about that, and he had to flee to Israel before most of the Jews were forced to flee. He was already gone. His family later joins him. It's not many years later. He worked as a hydrologist. That was his day job for like a quarter of a century. But he also studied psychology and Arabic literature. And he was 45 years old. This should be a lesson to me. 45 years old before he started to really try to master Hebrew. And look what happened afterwards. So it is possible. It is possible to learn a new language that late. Unlike me and unlike Alex, it can be done. He published his first novel in 1974, and he was writing about Mizrahi immigrants and their lives in the transit camps during the 50s. And the title is All Men Are Equal, which immediately made me think of Animal Farm, because even though I haven't read that book, I think the theme probably was all men are equal, but some are more equal than others.
Yes.
He has written a total of 11 novels, 3 nonfiction books, a children's book. 4 of the novels are set in Baghdad and 4 are set in Haifa. The novels are like this one, they're intersectional.
Oh.
So in terms of the social, political, and ethnic relations between Jews and Arabs, Muslims and Christians, there's a huge desire for social justice in all of his work for equality. And he was one of the earliest writers in the Israeli scene to call for coexistence. Well, he wasn't the earliest, but he was an advocate for establishment of a Palestinian state before most people were taking that idea very seriously. I should mention that he disliked the term Mizrahi. It's an oversimplification, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought, yeah, but it's all we got right now. But to say that a Moroccan Jew shares the same culture and civilization as an Iraqi Jew or a Yemenite Jew is ridiculous. It's absurd. So he was very much aware of how individual people all have their own stories, and they're all different, and they all have validity. And that is Sami Michael standing on one foot.
Thank you. Maybe on one finger, on one toe, yes. Not only was he amongst the first one to call for the establishment of a Palestinian state, but the vast majority of Jews from Arab world hold right-wing opinions because of their background. So it was also very important that here is somebody who was born in Iraq and was subject to the Iraqi cruelty and to the regime there, calling for something like this. It was a phenomenal statement. So what are the themes in the book? Susan?
I'm just going to ask though, is he a popular author in Israel?
Yeah, I mean, his books were also translated to many languages, and you'll see as we'll talk later on, I mean, he very successfully puts himself in the head of a woman, and it's not the only book that he did it. So he got quite a big following in Israel, yes. And you can search him online, because I'm sure other of his books are as available as this one is, especially Victoria, which is another fantastic novel by him. Okay, so what are the themes in the book?
Well, certainly intermarriage between Jews, Christian Muslims, and Muslims. I mean,
Right.
Christian Israelis and Muslim Israelis.
Right. So it's more, the relationship between the Jews and the Arabs.
Right.
And we will look at some, I mean, there's a whole list. I made several place marks for good quotations. I don't know if we have time to talk about all of them, but a few of them we'll go over. Yeah, what else? What other themes are quite...
The tension between traditional cultural standards and modern, what is developing as modern Israeli culture. On both sides, both on the Arab and the Jewish side.
Right, wonderful. So I'm going to enlarge it a little bit, and I'm going to say that the dramatic atmosphere in this book is given by a theme that we can generalize like living under constant fear. And what you gave us an example, it's one of them. I mean, this huge conflict between how a traditional society will raise their men and especially women to what the surrounding offers them. And we see it not only in the Arab family. Where else do we see it, Kyla? There's another family that we see there. Remember Adina from the, not Adina, Shirley from the travel agency. Shirley is an Ashkenazi girl, young woman. She, her father is a gynecologist, and she was dating a Moroccan student, a Moroccan PhD student. And her family was very, very upset about that, right? So if we're talking about this living under constant fear or with a lot of tension, what other elements in the book cause that tension? What other examples can we find about dealing with tension or being threatened by something?
Well, there's intergenerational tension between Alex and his parents.
Right.
His parents' whole history in Russia as well.
Yeah. Is there another family that we can say the same thing about? What about Huda's family?
Oh, I was going to say the landlord and his son.
Yes, so the landlord threatens to evict them, right? And the son threatens Mary because he wants to marry her. So he threatens physically. The father threatens financially. The son threatens physically, and he brings his thugs along. Right. What else? What about the family itself? Remember who lived on the roof before Alex rented the room? They were workers, day laborer from the West Bank. They were as men on their own. They were threatening the young women in the family. Let's look at the family for a second. We have a grandfather, we have a widowed mother, and two young women. This is a very unstable family. They have no male protector in their world. So the young women are constantly under threat. And day laborers like this could easily threaten them. What else? What happened with the relatives from the village with the arranged marriage? Remember?
Well, it almost blew up because apparently Huda has no dowry.
Not Huda, Mary, right.
Mary has no dowry.
Right. So they threatened to cancel the shidduch. So the family has to live with this fear. What else?
Fearing the mother-in-law
Yes.
and having to live under her roof
Right.
as part of what the next step is going to be once she gets married. Sounds
Mhm.
horrible.
Yes. Quite threatening, yes. And the mere appearance of a Jewish man, even though they called him a dwarf at the beginning, but a strong, muscular Jewish man, threatens the entire Arab world around him. Because they're the minority. Even though he's an immigrant, he's a Jewish Israeli. And that adds another level of uncertainty and of threat. Anything else?
Well, just how they had to meet. I mean, couldn't walk in the street together. They had to, because it was dangerous.
Right.
And even when she was walking to work, sometimes it was dangerous.
Right. And Huda, remember how old Huda is?
30?
She's 30.
Almost 30, yeah, or just
30.
Well,
coming
she's 30
30.
because she has a birthday. She has a
Birthday,
birthday.
right,
They're
at
giving
work.
Right. They're giving her a present at work. This is an old maid. Think of Victorian times, okay? If you're 30 and you're unmarried, this is an old maid. And an old maid in traditional society has a very, very compromised status. Okay, so this was one. Yeah, please.
People who have used the raised hand function. And they
Oh, I'm so sorry. Jerry, go ahead.
Gordon was first.
Gordon was first. Thank you, Luther.
Okay, I don't mind if Jerry goes first, but that's fine. I was just going to say one of the themes to me seemed like not exactly secrets, but failure to grapple with the underlying tension. I mean, what I really, the unclear relationship between the grandfather and the mother-in-law. You know, there's that whole thing about how we speak.
One of
and
the
how we-
biggest criticisms of electric cars goes something like this. They're good until you need to replace.
That was not my comment.
That was not my comment either. Even though I do own an electric car, okay?
Okay.
So-
Well, so, no, I was just, and that whole thing with the trumpet being unable to express and unable to communicate.
Thank you. Jerry, please.
Yeah, expanding on Gordon, I don't know about theme, but there are an awful lot of relationships described here. So yeah, you
Right.
have the grandfather and mother. You also have two Arab men who, against the wishes of their parents, or at least one parent, father or mother, still are pursuing a woman, which
Right.
may be part of what's going on here. And then you've got also Alex is pursuing Huda, although of course his mother, doesn't like that either. So there's a lot of what not with your parents. And I'm not sure where Adina is having, I guess, an extramarital affair with Boaz, I guess, but they're and then Shirley has several relationships, but there's a lot going on there. And I don't know how that fits in necessarily, but there's a lot there. So that's all.
The women from the office, the Israeli women from the office, represent the liberal surrounding that Huda and Mary have to navigate through. Because for a woman like Adina, who's a war widow, and she lives with the fear of having her son sent to a commander unit, and she's in love with her boss, and a woman like Shirley, who couldn't care less what her parents say, and she lives her life the way she wants to live, bring all this liberal tension. It's 1982, and Israeli society, I don't know how American society was then, but Israeli society was already quite promiscuous. So that's an enormous sexual tension, like you mentioned, that's put on the girls, and we know how Mary behaves, okay? All right, so all this.
But Kaya, that 1982 was the year of the Lebanon War, as you well know. How much did the atmosphere of that affect the book, do you think, if at all? But it was a pretty tough time. We were there, and we were actually, long story, we actually went to Lebanon, but that's a whole story. But we were actually in Israel during that period of time.
And Lebanon.
And it was a complicated time with Israel, and so that's the years in which this book takes place. But I'm not quite sure I can tell you it affected the book very much. What do you think?
The war happens at the very end of the book, and the book was published in 1987. So you can imagine that whatever happens between 1982 to 1987 was purified into some of the things that happen in this book. But in terms of sexual revolution, like I said, the 1980s, the beginning of the 1980s, Israel was quite the young generation, of course, and the Chilonim, those who were not the religious people, were quite promiscuous. The Arab society was a lot less rigid in terms of religious observance than it is today. There was, after the 1990, there was some kinds of a return to more strict religious observance. So in the 1980s, both society let loose a little bit. And it affects, of course, the protagonists in this book. Let's look at this theme that was mentioned before, the relationship between Jews and Arabs. Like I said, there's so many citations, but let's look at one of them. Chapter 18, page 181. And it's a very long paragraph, but we can start with, I told him frankly. That's when he starts. Let's see. It's about almost a little over the middle of the book, middle of the page. It says, I told him frankly, it's better for the Jew to go forward. Luther, did you find it?
Yes, I have it now.
Yeah, let's start reading because this basically summarizes all the other citations, even though there's a lot more information that comes through.
I told him frankly, it's better for the Jew to go forward and the Arabs to follow. You are Arab like I am Mongolian. But I am an Arab, Alex, and so are Mary and Wahid. Has it ever happened to you that a policeman asked for your identity card just because he thought you were an Arab? It happened to you? No, I look like a Jew and I speak like a Jew. Mary and I don't talk Arabic in public. Like many Arabs, we disguise ourselves as Jews. We were traveling. Keep going.
Yeah, keep on going. Yeah.
We were traveling south on the Dimona Road. Bedouin encampments dotted the bare landscape. I do not want to know, Alex said. In Russia, they told me Israelis are screwing Arabs. I was sorry for them, and I gave blood for Palestinians to annoy my mother. Here I hear all the time Arabs are making plots to kill all the Jews. And do you believe it? Wahid asked. I don't want to believe nothing. Papa believed too much and screwed up his life. I spit on all that. They can all kill each other. I don't care. I just want to live in peace. What all that nonsense about identity card? He said to Wahid. You were asked? No, Wahid replied. One day I was arrested because of my identity card. He took the card from his wallet and put it on the steering wheel for Alex to see. And because you are Arab, they catched you? His ironic tone annoyed me, but Wahid remained calm. There was an explosion at the central bus station in Tel Aviv. They stopped all the Arabs in the neighborhood, me too, even though I was injured. This wouldn't happen to you in Israel. Huda is right. It's best that you are driving. If anything happens on the way, you could say, we are with you and we're good Arabs. It's not easy to be a good Arab, especially when you don't know exactly what a good Arab is. Many Jews think that a good Arab is a dead Arab. How can you manage to be dead the whole time?
Thank you, Luther. Do we need to say more? Anybody has any comment on that? A question? How can you be a good dead Arab all the time? And even today, in 2023, there's quite a number of people who think that a good Arab is a dead Arab.
I thought it was amazing that it came from Wahid, who was originally characterized as a dumb peasant.
Right, right.
Very insightful.
Right. And it took him a while to be able, because he was so focused on Mary's sexuality, he was so attracted to her that he was unable to put two words together. But when they're away from his family, especially his mother, right? Little by little, he starts to gain and he's not an idiot. He may be an uneducated man, but he's not an idiot. Anything else? There are a lot of, if you want to be a little bit more aware of this, you can go through the book again and look at all the places where the relationship between Jews and Arab are mentioned. And there are tons of them, okay? When the book first came in 1987, some of the reviewers said that they accused Sami Michael of oversimplifying the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I want you to remember this because I'm going to ask you in a few minutes whether this is really the most important thing about the book. Anyway, what other themes appears here? Sometimes in the background, sometimes quite in your face, but it's not really giving a name. What do you think? Think about Huda. I'm looking for feminism. As we said before, this is coming of age book. Huda grows and develops. But the book, I mean, you can read the book as a feminist coming of age novel. There's so many things that we can discuss about it, and we will. The other theme is what good literature deals with, and what in this series that we've been doing it for years, we dealt on so many books and so many levels. The human condition and identity. And we have to read a comment that Grandpa Elias said, which again, like what you said, Karen, coming from a dumb peasant, it's so insightful. He was another dumb peasant, okay? And he also makes this amazing statement, chapter 20, page 201. It's the second paragraph that starts, you think in my village I knew. Luther, can you read it, please?
You think in my village I knew whether I was an Arab or an Indian? They told me I was an Arab, and I said, so be it. If the Beatles had told me I was a Beatle, I'd have said, so be it. Huda's man is like me. They told him he's a Jew, and he had no choice in the matter. They'll tell him to go and kill children who are out to kill children, and he'll go. The one certain fact you know about him is that he loves your daughter and wants her to be his wife. What a terrible crime.
Thank you. Thank you. So Grandpa Elias says it quite frankly. I mean, ethnic background, it's an arbitrary distinction. We have no control over it. What kind of control does a person has is whether they let the national identity overshadow the personal identity.
I see that Jerry has his hand up.
Jerry, please.
Yeah, I don't know if you comment on this, Chaya. One thing that actually surprised me was the reaction of many of the Arabs to Huda and being with a Jew. I mean, not her. I guess her cousins were all antagonistic, but and her mother to some extent. But the mother came around. The grandfather, even Zuhair's father, Wahid. They were all like,
right.
What's almost like what's the problem, right, or whatever. And I expected more of a conflict there, as Huda expected, apparently, right, as well. But it didn't happen really. So I don't know what what's behind that. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Anybody has any insight on that? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Stan.
I didn't hear his comment, but I was going to say about Huda that she had her own. I mean, she wasn't traditional. She had her own drives, and she was leading her own path, and which is very different from all the rest. And it's kind of really powerful. I mean, one could call her a feminist in a sense, because she was out in the world doing what she wanted to do and what was important to her. And she was out in society, she was mixing with others.
Carol, that's a very important remarks, and we'll come back to this in a few minutes, okay? Jerry was saying that he was surprised how people came around about the relationship of the future marriage between Huda and Alex. And Jerry, you can see it. Oh, Mim, go ahead.
they're not Muslim, are they? Aren't they Christian?
They are Christian,
Now,
yes.
doesn't that have something, doesn't that further complicate things? I mean, their identification with the Arab minority is complicated by the fact that they're a minority within the minority. I mean,
That's
it's not like they're religious Muslims or anything.
That's very true. But Jerry also mentioned Abu Nakhla, the landlord, who was a Muslim, and he himself didn't have too many issues with the marriage, even though later on, Jerry, if you remember, he made a very astute statement. Somehow it's the third man that we are just mentioning, making a astute statement. We have to go back to the women in a second. He made a statement saying to Huda, "Oh, your family really had it prepared very well. On one hand, you have a Palestinian martyr who were killed in Lebanon, and on the other hand, you have a Jew as a son-in-law. You really have it on both ends, right?" Remember when he said this to them?
Right.
So when we talk about Abu Nakhla is a criminal who made his money in dealing with the Israeli authorities, okay? So for him to come up and really negate such a union may be a little bit dangerous in his world view of thinking always where the bottom line is.
I just thought it was interesting how Huda herself seemed to be so concerned, right, about being a traitor and this and that and not fitting in anywhere. And should she even go ahead with it? And yet it seems to me those closest around her, including the landlord, were like, what's the problem? You love each other, get married, or deal with it, or I don't know. It just seemed
But what I was going to say is that marriage and relationship between Palestinian and Jews on the national level, they're always taboos, okay, from both sides. But on a personal level, it's very, very different. And in this case, I think the answer is that the family was concerned with two things. One, they were concerned with the fact that Huda is 30 and she's unmarried. And they really liked Alex. Alex was able to bring the family to like him through his behavior, through protecting Mary. Remember, he was fighting with Zuhair. He protected them. So it was a very personal decision. Mim, you wanted to say something else?
Well, what I was getting at was because they're not Muslim, and also Alex's Jewishness is entirely assigned.
Right.
It's nothing he ever felt.
Right.
So that neither of them is highly identified personally with the causes that they're supposed to be identified with. He's just been told he's a Jew and therefore you have to do X, Y, and Z.
Right. Yes.
She's been told you're an Arab, you have to do X, Y, and Z. But they don't seem, either of them, to feel they're not very patriotic about their ethnic identity.
They're not very religious. And like Grandpa Elia said before, Alex is just like me. He was assigned this arbitrary distinction of him being a Jew and me being an Arab instead of a Beduin. So yeah, Kyla, please.
Well, it's not just not being religious. I mean, there was nothing about Alex's life that made him feel like a Jew. He just was
Israeli.
Or Israeli. He's just who he is. He's been issued an identity card that tells him who he is, and that's what he's stuck with, and that's what they're stuck with.
Yeah.
Over the years in visiting Israel, we have met a number of Jewish Arab couples, both Christian and Muslim, but they go back to this period. They go back to the 80s. I think they go back to pre-Intifada. I think today it would be a very, very different story. You would not see that kind of acceptance on either side, but it was coming then, and it was looser. It was more open, and I'm not saying it was good or bad, but it happened, and it happened then, and we've met some of those couples who've had very long, satisfying relationships and managed somehow or other to live in that culture, even though there's such a division.
It happened through 75 years of state. I mean, there were couples that married in 1948, okay, when they were true enemies and they married. We always think of Julia and Romeo and Juliet, okay? And we were thinking of maybe talking about the book All the Rivers, which talks about another very contemporary relationship but reverse between an Israeli woman and a Palestinian man.
But they're outside of Israel.
Yes, but the family
really-
lives in Israel, right.
Yeah.
So there is, by the way, I don't know if any of you subscribe to Haaretz, but there was a woman who has a weekly column, sometimes every other week. Her name is Porat. Again, she calls herself by her daughter's name. She's an Israeli who's married to a guy from Shechem, from Nablus. Now they live in the United States, but she used to write from Nablus. She lived with his family in Nablus, and she would write the column every week. So look her up. It's very, very interesting. So we talked about the themes. We gave some clues here and there. What is the essence of the book? It's more than just a love story. What does the book bring to our attention that we didn't see in the themes, and we didn't see in the title? What is there underneath all of that? Luther gave you a clue before when he was talking about Sami Michael. Susan, please, and unmute yourself.
It seems to be kind of a hopefulness that love conquers all, that if you really on an individual level can communicate and form a close relationship, that you can overcome the difference between cultures or social groups.
Thank you. Who are the people, who are the characters in the book?
I mean, besides Huda and Alex,
yeah, think of all the characters. Okay, if Luther and I had to analyze the book in one word and say, what is this all about? And we can always say, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and like I told you before, the reviewers said that this book is very superficial in its description. It's about intersectionality. Because every character in this book has so many hats, and some of the hats are conflicted with each other. Let's look at Grandpa Elias. Grandpa Elias is an Egyptian Copt, okay? The Copt are an indigenous a group in Egypt. He's a Palestinian, he's a refugee, he's a father, and he's also an Israeli. Alex, he's a Russian, he's Israeli, he's a Jew, he's a male, he's white. Huda, she's a Palestinian female, okay? She's unmarried, she's Christian, she's an Israeli. She suffers from some kind of a debilitating illness. We'll talk about it in a minute. Her mother, Huda, she's a Palestinian, she's a Christian, she's an Israeli, she's a woman, she's Middle Eastern in her appearance, okay? She's a widow, she's dispossessed. And we can go on and on and on. We have Shirley, who's dating the Mizrahi Jew, okay? Who is the Ashkenazi. We have the Sephardi, the Mizrahi against the Ashkenazi. There are so many mixed identities in this book. And a person with so many mixed identities has to walk sometimes a tightrope. Think about us here, Jewish American. I'm an Israeli Jewish American. How many, And at least half of the person here are female and the other half of, how many identities can one person deal with at the same time? The demonstrations that we are holding to save Israeli democracy every Sunday doesn't draw a lot of American Jews. One of the reasons that I heard is that American Jews not only they think it's a private matter in Israel, but they don't want to make too much fuss. They're engaged with anti-Semitism is a big threat right now, and there are other issues. This is how some people deal with their multiple identities. Some people just cannot hold all of them together, combine all of them together, find a peaceful relationship between all of them. Sometimes they're in big conflict with each other. And if we take somebody like the grandfather, who we don't know whether he had a profession, according to what Huda describes, they were pretty poor when she grew up, so he must have had, holding day jobs, so he was a laborer. Think about him, somebody who came from Egypt. He was widowed, his wife died with a young son. Oh, the son wasn't that young then, but still a refugee like him. Think about Huda's mother. All of those identities make for a very, very difficult existence. And when we have a political atmosphere that's very easily can be set on fire, those identities can be a real danger. Any other comment or question about those intersectionalities? Diane, please.
I think one relationship that seemed without conflict was the sibling relationship between Mary and Huda. That was kind of the light, the purity, the love.
Right. Even though they're so different, they're polar opposites in some aspects, right? Any other comments?
Julia had her hand up too.
Please, Julia.
This might be tangential to the discussion, but as an American Jewish female feminist, the term intersectionality now makes me very uncomfortable.
What would you use instead?
Well, I don't know, because intersectionality is now being used to say that American Jewish women who support the existence of Israel cannot be feminists. So I don't know a better word. I mean, just multiple identities.
Okay. I mean, it's a fair point, and I know, of course, very well what you're talking about, right? Okay, so the multiplicity of identities. A rose is just a rose by name, right?
Right. Well, in some circles, it's not.
It's not. Yeah. Gordon, please. Unmute yourself. Gordon.
Yeah. I just thought what you said though at the end of what you were talking about with intersectionality is really important, because I thought the book was less about the tensions of intersectionality within people, but more on how when events happen like Lebanon, different aspects of your personality are challenged, and your own ability to reconcile, and those different elements of your personality are thrown out of whack. Just like when Alex moved in, that upset everybody's sense of the harmony that they had,
right?
Their reconciliation. Yeah.
Right. Karen, please. Karen.
I just had this insight about the title, and I think maybe you were talking about that when the meeting, I came in a few minutes late, but it's very sexual, the title.
Yes.
The trumpet you were explaining, but it's also a phallic image, and a wadi, which is described as a ravine, and a which is very dry, which refers to
Oh, nice.
Buddha's sexual anorexia in the beginning, except it's dry except during the flooding season. So there's just something very sexual about the title.
Nice, nice. Yes, of course, the trumpet is a phallic symbol. But I love the image of, you know, her being dried and then refilling when she wakens up sexually. Yes, lovely. Jerry?
Yeah, I must admit, I'm not seeing the intersectionality in each individual. All right, so you're an Arab Christian woman, okay, but I mean, most of us are something and one gender or another, or maybe non-binary, but whatever. But certainly, I think it's clear that Michael, he created this house, right, which was quite intersectional by bringing the Jew in, or the trumpet right in, with a Muslim landlord, but a Christian family with a Jew upstairs. Obviously, he was creating kind of like a mini, intersectionality among them. But until then, I thought, I mean, Huda could have stayed an Arab Christian with the cousin who's the martyr and been very clear on her identity. If I guess maybe, but I guess that, with the trumpet coming into the wadi, that was that I guess was no longer an option for her, maybe. But yeah.
Yeah, and you remember that later on, when she's considering becoming a Jew, right? She's going through, what does it take? Do you think I can do it? Can I make it? All this process of how can you be one or the other? Jerry, I can see you. Oh, over there. Okay. Did you want to say something else, Jerry?
No. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm done.
Okay. So let's go to Huda. Let's talk about the narrator. So who's the narrator in this book? What kind of voice do we have?
Isn't it Huda, first person? Or whatever you
Yeah,
call
so
it?
it's a first person, right? It's a first person limited, right? Narration. Do we have an all-knowing narrator somewhere in the book? Is it all from Huda's perspective? Luther, please help us out.
Yes, I will, because there are two places where you have an omniscient narrator.
Yeah.
And one is giving Alex's backstory. There's a whole chapter.
Parents, yes.
And the other is Elias's backstory.
Yeah.
And in both of those cases, it's an omniscient.
Right. And it's quite interesting that Michael decided that he's going to take the grandparents and present them as an overview narration and give the rest of the book to Huda. Huda's name means, in Arabic, it means serious and attentive and even generous, okay? So not only did Sami Michael write the others, he write about Arabs in his book, he write about other nationalities in his book, but he put himself in the head of a young woman whose position is a quintuple minority. She's Palestinian, she's Christian, she's a female, she's fatherless, and she's an old maid. 5 minorities. And why is it a minority? Because in the Arab world, and to some degree in Israeli culture as well, even in the liberal open culture, being an old maid is a handicapped, okay? It's a label for life, because in the Arab society, a woman needs a man's protection. A woman needs, remember what the mother said to Mary, a woman needs a man to support her. And she's fatherless. And the father is the one who gives his protection to the girls in the family, to the daughters. We don't have a father. We have Elias, but Elias is an old man now. So he's his protection is not so stable as if he had his son alive. Huda is, as we said, she's 30 years old, and sexually she's very naive, she's repressed, she's a virgin, and she's also withdrawn. What do you think about her physical appearance?
I don't think she's not attractive, as I
You
recall.
think so? Let's see, what's
Physically?
attractive?
She's an interesting person, and she goes under her own tunes, but I don't think she's attractive.
Oh, as pretty as Mary.
Yeah,
Well,
Mary,
she's being
Mary is the
told,
pretty one.
well, she's being told by, okay, I have Susan and I have Jerry, please, before and Mim too. So let's start with Susan.
I was just going to say is that I think she was thin, and I think her
Yes.
mother found in the Arab world, if you're too skinny, you're not beautiful.
Yes, thank you.
And
Thank you.
when I was in Morocco, I found out that young women go to fat camp to gain weight from the waist down. That
Thank
was
you.
very important to have a big bottom. And so the teenage girls spend their summer. I don't know what you can eat to make the weight go where you want it. But anyway, that's another question.
Jerry, please.
Yeah,
Jerry?
at first, there were people who made comments like, who would marry a girl like this, or, whatever. And I just assumed there must be some appearance issue, or maybe even some, something going on there. But
Right.
But then afterwards, you read about, she's certainly not seen that way later, either by Alex or Alex's mother or father, or I think her colleagues in the travel agency. I think she's even called beautiful, right? Or
Right,
whatever.
right.
And so indeed, it may be maybe some cultural thing about she wasn't considered physically beautiful by one measure, but by like Israeli society or Alex coming from Russia, it's like, yeah, she's, she's beautiful, right? Maybe because she was thin, right? I don't know. So
Yes, yes. She describes herself as being thin and small. And it was Alex and his father who commented how beautiful she was. Mim, please. You have your hand up?
Yeah, the truth is we don't have any idea what she looks like, really, because you're seeing her. She doesn't look in the mirror.
Mhm.
She just tells you what other people say.
Right.
And so and considering that she's the narrator, what you get is her confusion actually about what she looks like, or who she, who she is to the world, because there are different worlds and she's somebody entirely different depending who's looking. So all she can tell you is what this one thinks and what that one thinks and what the other one says, but she can't really describe herself very well.
Right. All of you made really good comments. But we know, and based on the tradition in the Arab world, that a woman does have to have a certain percentage of fat on her body to be considered attractive. And the reason is that there's a belief in those societies that fat equals fertility. Okay, so a woman who's fatter will be more fertile. And we know that Mary is voluptuous. Okay, so there's a comparison between a small and thin girl versus a young woman versus her sister who is voluptuous. And it could be that both of the faces are beautiful, similarly beautiful, but Mary is seen through her body. The first thing that people, when they look at her, they see her body. And with Huda, it's not like this. And there's a description when Bahij, her old lover, father, came to ask for her hand in marriage, and how shocked he was when he saw her. And the only conclusion when a reader who reads it can come to is she must be really, really thin, and therefore they're not impressed by what a wonderful mother she can be. What do we know about the other parts of her body, her brain? She's very smart. She's very smart. She's very, she's analytical. She always look at situations, and before acting, she analyzes them, and then makes a decision how to go forward. She also is a lot of other things. She's the breadwinner of the family. And this is something that's anti the social norm in an Arab society. The woman is the supporter here. There's no father, and Huda is the one who goes to work every day. She's friendly. The people at this travel agency loves her. She's a wonderful co-worker. She looks like an Israeli. She's eloquent. She knows the Hebrew she knows Hebrew very well. She never speaks, like we said before, she never talks Arabic in public. She's devoted to her family. She's curious. I mean, everything that we can say. Do we have anything bad to say about Huda? She's an amazing woman.
Amichai. She likes Amichai.
And she loves Amichai. She loves poetry. Anything else that we can say about Huda? In addition to all those amazing character traits, yeah, Susan.
I was just going to say that her body rebelled against her, basically, that she had all these aches and pains and was really, I don't know, crippled by them to some extent, that she really, and so I think she was in antagonistic relationship with her own body. And so, and it was being very repressed sexually. I think it was also, and I think it was partly from guilt, partly that society made her feel guilty that she had rejected this other marriage offer. And I don't.
We'll talk about the marriage offer in a minute. But
the psychosomatic illness is what
right. So for lack of further description, it's some kind of a psychosomatic disorder.
Right.
And what does the sister tell her? She says later on, after she made love to Alice, she said, Dr. Alice cured you. Because all of a sudden she felt much better. Karen, how did you remark on her sexual regression? You said sexual atrophy? What did you say?
It's called sexual anorexia.
Sexual anorexia, thank you.
But I wanted to say also about her, she's very caring and considerate, even, willing to meet her possible future in-laws, even after hearing the incredible horror stories, and tries to be nice to the mother, who's just a complete madwoman.
Right. And not just that, but she even invites her to live with them.
Right.
Yeah.
Very caring of Alex, even before they're actually together, bringing him food, and she's just a very caring person. She seems to care about her co-workers, and she knows about their lives, and she's a very loving person.
Mm-hmm. So, as I started to say, in addition to all those amazing character traits, and she's really a strong, wonderful young woman, she's also quite critical of the statue of women in Arab society. And let's look at two sources. One is chapter 4, page 41. And this starts with freedom, I thought. So it should be on the bottom. It's on in the bottom paragraphs, like 3 sentences into the paragraph. Also, it starts with the word freedom.
Got it.
Please read it.
Freedom, I thought, is a weighty burden which not everyone can bear, especially not women, most especially not Arab women.
And then, if you don't mind reading a sentence that starts with, perhaps she found it easier. That's about Mary. 2 sentences down.
Perhaps Mary found it easier to avoid making the decision about her life and left it to others. She was still tripping barefoot about the room, but her provocativeness was pathetic. She was no longer stepping like a fresh runway model, more like a weary tightrope dancer wishing for a safety net.
What an amazing insight. Let's go now to another reflection, and this is page 6, I'm sorry, chapter 6, page 70. And this should start with, in my bed at night. It's the second paragraph.
In my bed that night, I hugged my knees in distress. We girls were raised and trained to get married. They didn't bring us up as people who live in a community, but rather as soldiers trained to carry out a mission. Plotting, cunning, booty, triumphs, defeats, and false morale, all were legitimate in the struggle for the coveted goal, a husband to support us.
And there's more. We don't have time to read the entire paragraph, but we can see how critical she is of her position. And she wants to do something about it. And like Carol mentioned before, I mean, she's quite strong and she wants to pave her own path. And she is a feminist. What about Mary? Jerry, please, before we go to Mary.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm not totally convinced because yes, I see what she said there, but look what happens. You have Mary looking for a father for her unborn child, right? Thinking of the child, and even Huda. Yes, Huda could have said, "Look, I'm 30 years old. I have a job. I could support myself. I don't need Alex. I don't need this." But she doesn't, right? She ends up, and then with Alex, it's like, of course we'll have children. We'll have children, and where does it end with Alex's child, right? And I guess I'm not convinced, Haya, yet that that Huda is really that feminist. Why didn't she then just go off on her own, right? But she doesn't, right? She gets the husband, or about to, right? That seemed to be her fulfilled dream, is to get the husband and have children. So,
Jerry, I will answer you in about 10 minutes, okay? But I just want to remind everyone that at the beginning, when Abu Nakhla came to visit them, she very hesitantly asked if she could rent the room on top of the room on top of on the roof. She is tired of being confined inside, of being looked at. She wants to be the one on top, the one who's looking outside. Think about it. Why? What's the meaning of her working for a travel agency? What does she do at the travel agency? She sells flight tickets, right? Can she soar? She cannot. But she can at least have the fantasy of soaring. And by selling travel tickets and thinking, oh, there's a flight going somewhere on the world, maybe she can soar above, the loneliness and the brutality of the men around her and the labeling. I mean, even as a very strong young woman, being labeled an old maid is quite an insult. It's something that goes beyond just, being a superficial put down. It hurts you in your soul. And being reminded all the time that maybe she wasn't good enough to get a husband, it's very, very complicated. And I'm going back to the multiple identities, because all of those lived within her. And she didn't solve it at the end of the book, but at least she found something. Let's look at the other women. Because of your question, instead of looking at Mary, let's look for a second at the mother, okay? And in chapter 1, page 8, there's a very insightful sentence that the mother said. 8, she says, I'm not stupid. It's the second paragraph on the top, Luther.
I'm not stupid. I've been measuring my wings since I was a girl, and they still haven't grown. I know I'll break my neck with someone like Abu Nakla.
So even the mother, okay, who raises her daughters to get married, to have a supporting husband, she is a human being. She at some point wanted to grow wings and to soar. But the society didn't let her, and she's still looking at them and thinking maybe one day. And she lived a very tough life, and she's a very strong woman, you know, raising two girls without a husband. So anyway, Jerry, we'll go back to your comment in a few minutes. What about Mary? So we've already said that Mary is almost the polar opposite of her sister. She's in terms of her look, she's voluptuous, she's provocative. She looks at the world around her, you know, she wants to live like the Israelis. Is she smart? What does Huda say about her sister? Anybody remember?
Yeah, didn't she say at one point that Mary, she's smart, she speaks English, Hebrew, Arabic, and like what good did
Right.
it do her or something, right? Yeah. I
Right,
think something.
right. So we have a second sister. Both sisters are bright, okay? If they lived in another house, they would have a professional career in front of them. And Mary thinks that because she lives in Israel in the 1980s, she can find equality. She can behave almost similar to the way the men do. And she gets burned. Zuhair ends up raping her, even though she said, it's also my fault because there was a stage in which I could have stopped him. But she wanted to have sex. Who are we to blame her? Her society will blame her. And it's a double whammy for her, because not only she lost her virginity, which in the Muslim world is still quite a strong requirement. By the way, the numerous section of plastic surgery in Arab countries in which they repair, in which they do the hymen repair, yes. So not just she lost her virginity, but she's also pregnant. And now she's stuck. And all she has is, like Huda said in the section that we read before, to put her neck down, ready to put the yoke on. And she has to trip, unfortunately, she has to trip Bahi to think that he was the one who caused her to lose her virginity and to get pregnant. Very sad. Such a promising young woman, and she becomes a traditional victim of Arab patriarchal society.
But as testimony to how smart she is, she figures out how to get Wahid not only to believe that he is the father of the child, but to want her in the first place.
Yeah.
So she, within these parameters that are so strict and tight, she still manages to get something to happen that's desirable for her.
Right. But Huda said at the very beginning, there's a place where she said that she's worried about Mary, and she said at this stage, I didn't know what kind of a price she's going to pay at the end. So that's like, you know, a foreseeing omen of what's going to really happen to her. We don't have much time, so before we talk about the male characters, I want to say one comment about the mothers. Alex's mother and Isam, which is Mary's future mother-in-law. And by the way, of course, she was called Mary, right? A Christian family. What other, a girl who gets pregnant, what else would you call her if not Mary? We have two strong women, okay, who exert control over, you know, their household. They come across as tyrannical, mean, misguided at times, but think about the circumstances, okay? And it could be that in their own misguided, really awkward way, that was the only way that they were able to yield some control over the circumstances. Because Alex's mother, I mean, she was basically thrown into a very difficult situation with Alex's father. We don't know what the condition of Mary's future mother-in-law is, how she was brought into the family and all of that. But in such surrounding, when the patriarchy is so strong, and women are constantly subjugated, some women, like these two women, found an awful way, but found the wrong way of dealing with the surrounding. Okay, Luther, can you tell us about the two male protagonists?
Yes, the two brothers with different mothers. Because they really are so similar. I'll start with Alex, whose name was probably Sasha.
Yeah. We talked about it because nobody outside of Russia will nickname Alexander as Alex. In Russia, they would say Sasha.
Yeah.
But in the US and Israel, it's always Alex.
Yeah. So here he is, he's an unwilling immigrant, and he's going to become an unwilling soldier. You know, he is, if we want to talk about trauma, he's had multiple traumas in his life, as has Elias. You know, he was separated from his family and from his parents at a very early age, sent to the orphanage. His reunion with his family and his parents was equally traumatic, because he actually got really comfortable living in the orphanage and he kind of liked it there. And so his life has been turned upside down multiple times. He was injured, he was hit in the head, so what he probably suffered was some form of traumatic brain injury, and it's affected his sight. So now he has a vision problem. He's ostracized, he's mocked, and he's made fun of because he wears glasses, because he's become visually impaired. And then he makes an involuntary aliyah. He's dislocated yet again. It wasn't even his idea. He's separated from the girl that is his lover when this happens, and it was his mom that arranged this and manipulated him. So he ends up in some ways he's profoundly alienated because of all of these multiple things, and yet that alienation is a source of strength for him. He's literally strong. He's done this physical training. He can beat what's her name's friend at tennis. He fought off Zuhair, and he has no allegiance. He has no allegiance to Mother Russia. In many ways, he has no allegiance to his own mother. And he doesn't really have any allegiance to Israel. His allegiances are to Huda and to music. Those are the things that end up mattering to him the most. You know, he doesn't have a strict identity, and that's a huge strength. Wherever he goes, he's an outsider. We talked about this. And I want to say that term intersectionality is like so many other terms that gets appropriated by people for their own political purposes, and we have to reclaim it for what it is in essence. We have every right to use the term intersectionality and not have it be a criticism of progressive Zionism. We have every right to use it however we want to use it, because everyone else does. But he's an outsider, and that's what really allows him to form these fluid relationships that are just boundary breaking. He doesn't see any problem in marrying a Christian girl, a Christian Arab woman for that matter, or in embracing her family, because he doesn't recognize those boundaries. Even though I keep saying he doesn't have an allegiance, he feels a strong sense of obligation. He does feel an obligation to his mom and to his parents, even though in a sense he was abandoned by them. Actually, it was the state that enforced that abandonment, but imagine how it felt to a child, a small child like that. And his mother's response to trauma in her own life has caused her to become just toxic, almost a predator, you know. She's so deeply damaged, so deeply wounded, that all she can do is try to wound everyone around her. But he still feels this obligation to her. Feels like he's got to do something for her. And he feels the obligation to his adopted country. You know, when he's called up for reserve service, he doesn't even question it, even though it means that he can potentially kill the relatives of the woman he loves. And if he looks like he's being pulled by all these events that aren't of his own making or choosing, in some ways, there's a lot that he didn't have control over. Going to an orphanage, going into exile, it was all imposed on him. Being called up for the reserves, basically that's imposed on him. But he keeps struggling to make the best of things. And not unlike Huda, he's struggling to find his own way to have autonomy. He chooses to work from the shipyard. He kept his residence a secret from his parents for as long as he possibly could. He chooses Huda. He stood up to Zaher. He stood up to the hearse driver who brought the wrong corpse to his father's funeral. And he tries to stand up to his mom. He goes without hesitation when he's called up, but he's no zealot. Doesn't have the classic sense of nationalist patriotism. If you look on page 198, he says, "Next month I go on reserve duty in the Golan. I'm in fighting unit. I don't have another country. I don't have strength to go to another place, speak another language like a baby. Here I found Huda. I love her. I want to marry her even this evening. So now this country is my home with Huda. I want to live. If I get bullet in Golan, it will be stupid accident, like a sack falling on the head from a crane in a port. I don't want to die for a flag. It is not fair that the men who were here hate me, and Huda's mother does not want to talk to me." He's just his own person, and he struggles against all the attempts to put him in some kind of categorical box. Struggles to be only himself. And that's why Elias, the grandfather, likes him so much. And I think we mentioned earlier that Elias sees him. It says, you're like me, Chaya.
I wanted to mention what Luther read, I Don't Have Another Country. It's a famous song that Ehud Mano wrote in 1982, Ein li Eretz Acheret. And it became an anthem to so many causes in Israel. And even though Ehud Mano was quite leftist in his thinking, and he wrote it as a memory of his brother who was killed in that war of attrition, the same war that Meir Shalev was badly wounded in. It's just when you have a moment, go to YouTube, click and it say, in English you can say I Don't Have Another Country by Ehud Mano and listen to the song. it's a beautiful song.
Yeah, it really is a moving song, and of course that's what Sami Mikhail is quoting there. Elias, just like Alex, multiple traumas. He lost both his parents at a very early age. They and all of his siblings, and I think there was something like 10 siblings or something like that. And whereas Alex spent his childhood in an orphanage and wasn't an orphan, Elias really is an orphan. He lost his wife in childbirth. His son much later. We hardly know anything. I'm not even sure his son was given a name in this book. I don't recall finding it.
No.
Yeah, but he's gone. He was pretty much forced to make an exodus from Egypt to Haifa. And it's not really clear whether we know that Huda's family lost property during the war. It's not really clear what Elias had in 48 and whether he lost anything. But, you know, he's been through an awful lot and he's really resilient. He was perceived as an other like forever. Even when his parents were alive, they were poor and they were on the outskirts of the village. They weren't wealthy even then, so they were outsiders, physically outside. He was thought after the plague, and he was the only survivor. Everyone in town thought he was a ghost. Then he became magical. They figured out he was probably still alive, but he was magical. He was like a shaman. He was a healer, you know. So that's still like an othering that happens to him. He never gets bitter about this, you know. And after his wife gives birth and dies in the process, he basically, to save his son, because the wife's father doesn't want this kid to live. So he's basically driven out of his village, and that's when he makes the exodus. He's still an outsider once he gets to Haifa because he's a Coptic Christian. You know, he's not even Orthodox Christian. He's a Coptic Christian. It's a different kind of Christian.
It's a kind of Orthodoxy. I mean, it's not
it's
big, but
it's a variation.
Yeah.
But still, the majority of Christians in Haifa will be a different kind of Orthodox.
Yeah.
So multiple outsiders, but he doesn't identify strongly as anything other than a human being. You know. And so he's open to Alex. He's the one. He's the mediator. He's the healer. He's always pouring a rock on people, you know, so he never gives up on healing. But he sees both sides and he tries to see the good in everybody and make it work for them. And he's like the anchor that holds all these people together. Because for him, there aren't any boundaries. Also, he stands up to Abu Nakla.
Yeah.
He doesn't give them any space to breathe. He's a mensch.
Yes. Thank you, Luther. And like you said, they're so similar. Maybe that's why it was easy to Alex to bond with Grandpa Elias first before, you know, the mother relented, because there's so many similarities between the two of them. I wanted to say a few things for summary, and then we can have a bigger discussions. I told you before that the original reviewers were really unkind to the book because they thought that it's really a simplifying conflict. And they were dead wrong, because this is not a political book. that has to, concentrate on all the nuances of the conflict. This is a book about a woman, about a young woman trying to figure out her life. And what Sami Michael did, he minimized the conflict, but planted it very strongly in the consciousness of Huda. Huda, who is concerned about her sister marrying a man who's beneath her. She thinks that he has no intellectual ability, and it really bothers her. She thinks that Mary deserved better. And as Karen said before, even that simple man all of a sudden gave us such an insight of his life that, maybe her first judgment of him was wrong. But Huda grew up in a world where women are held by a rope. It's a metaphorical rope that prevents them from soaring. And she is trying, unlike Mary that wanted equality, Huda is trying to pave a path or to follow a path that was no dictator to her. And we talked about the metaphorical role in the travel agency. But Huda is searching for something of her own. She wants to create something that you don't compare to male existence. She wants to create something that's unique to her. And what Luther said about Alex just shows us why these two found each other. Because they both wanted the same thing. He wanted it for himself as an immigrant, and she wanted it as a woman. And she says in the book, I'm sitting in the backyard of this society, of a woman, the Arab woman whose inferior position is beyond everybody else. She's like on the bottom of the totem pole. And well, the feminist theme of the novel is sometimes between the lines and in the background. When Huda's brain and body are awakened by Alex and his trumpet, all of a sudden she allows herself to express thoughts and behavior that were there, but she either was not aware of them or she didn't allow herself to. And at the end of the novel, what we found, and Jerry, maybe this comes back to your comment before, she actualizes the basic feminist principle that she owns her own body. And nobody would think that in 2023, we still have to, in the United States, we still have to talk about this. But also not just that she is a master of her own body, but she also controls, and she's the master of her own female identity. And this is a huge revelation for somebody who comes from such a repressive background. At the end of the book, after Alex is killed in the war, Huda has to make a decision because she's pregnant and the father is not going to be around. And especially that she has a baby by a Jewish man. And she realizes, and she knows at this point, that becoming a mother is a personal decision. It's not a societal requirement. And while in the background, the conflict still brews, and there's the Lebanon war, and we are killing them and they are killing us. And she has to consider the ramification of the two religions, the two nationalities. But she understands that if she becomes a mother, it doesn't negate any of her identity. If she becomes a mother, if she decides to carry the child, she will have a decision. She will make the decision that her own decision, not something that her society forces her to do or the other society is against it. Huda comes out of age at the end of the book. We don't know what kind of decision she's making. but she comes out of age. And she comes out as a very strong woman. She comes of age as a very strong woman. Why does she read Amichai? Why not any other poets? In Amichai's poetry, and I'm generalizing it here, there's an emphasis on the individual person, their welfare, their happiness. And there's a constant, the life of the individual is constantly being threatened by powers above them. Religion, ideology, governments, history, army, war. And in such a world, a person can find comfort in one thing, according to Amichai, in love. And that love doesn't always last. It could be momentary. And this is why Amichai's poem collection is called Sh'at HaChesed, the moment of grace. And Huda and Alex found that moment of grace. They built the relationship in such a way that is compatible, is respectful, and is mutual. And it's quite outstanding that a poet that everybody calls the national Israeli poet, Yehuda Amichai, that his poetry is giving both literally and metaphorically to an Arab woman whose life the poem describes so well. Luther, could you read a paragraph from Amichai's poem? It's not the same poem that we talked about in the title, it's a different poem.
Oh.
And
it's the one we talked about. Mim has had her hand up before I do.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mim, I didn't see.
It's okay, I don't want to interrupt your theme. I want to talk about Bahij. There's one character we haven't really talked about.
Right, so let's read the poem. Let's hear the poem and we'll talk about Bahij.
A man needs to love and to hate at the same moment, to laugh and to cry with the same eyes, with the same hands to throw stones and to gather them, to make love in war and war in love, and to hate and forgive and remember and forget, to arrange and confuse, to eat and to digest what history takes years and years to do. A man doesn't have time. When he loses, he seeks. When he finds, he forgets. When he forgets, he loves. When he loves, he begins to forget.
And it's quite outstanding that, going back to the title, that Sami Michael took two poets who are considered national poets. Bialik was considered national poets of Zionism, and Amichai is national poet of Israel, and take both of them and to relate that to the story of a young Arab woman. Any questions about that? If not, we'll talk about Bahij. Okay, Mim, shall we analyze who he was? Bahij was a student. We know that he had either a flirt or he was playing with communism. I mean, he was on the left side of the map while he was a student. We know that he comes from a wealthy background, and he was dating Huda. We don't know exactly what happens, but then he either got married or got together with a German woman and brought her to his village. And the German woman didn't like living in that village. She didn't like being surrounded by hens and goats and sheep, and she fled back to Germany. So Bahish decided that he's going to ask Huda to marry him, and he sent his father to ask her hand in marriage. And this is when the description of her being small and thin comes into the writing, and we know that this is how his father saw her. He was astounded that his son would want to marry somebody like this. And not only that, but she refused. And she refused for two reasons. The first reason is that she realizes who Bahish was, that underneath his intellectual facade, there was a character, a soul that he was not a good person. And the second reason was that she didn't want to be asked after the first one left him. If she said yes, she would always feel not only like a second hand, but she would feel rejected. She would feel unworthy. And she didn't want to be in this position. And Bahish was doing very well. I mean, he had an academic degree from a university, and he was doing financially very well. And they're mentioning from here and there in the books that maybe she should, like the family, maybe she should have married him. Just to show, I mean, the whole story with Bahish just show us how strong her character is, and how she was really able to not to fall into this trap. So that's Bahish. Any other comments about the book? Karen wrote before that she would love to discuss all the rivers. It's not our favorite book, but if there's a demand, if there's an asking, no demand, there's a request, we may do it. I didn't see the other comment. Carol reminded us about the movie. I screened the movie years ago to That Shalom. It's available online from YouTube to all other venues. You can watch it. I suggest you watch it because the directors of the story are Israeli Russians. They made Aliyah from Russia. It's very interesting, their take on the book.
Gordon has his.
Gordon, I don't see you, but go ahead. Oh, I see. Go ahead.
Around, and I can't quite articulate it, Chayav, but we're left with. I mean, first of all, this was just an absolutely fascinating discussion, and I sort of feel overwhelmed by how much I did not get out of the book. So
that's the purpose of the discussion. I'm glad we did it.
No, it was wonderful. But the one thing, I mean, we're left with this kind of kernel that finding the grace of love in this environment. And I just can't help shaking the feeling that the book is much more ambivalent than that. That there's something about these, that it's true, but these are two very lost souls. And at the end, you could make the argument that last conversation, over Alex's tombstone is a reflection of that ambivalence and lack of, and you lose something when you have a lack of identity. I mean, the book is very affectionate in its way about about the Arab family and its relations, you know, as any dysfunctional family would be. So I felt like I can't articulate it into a theme or a moral or whatever, but it does feel to me that there's more ambivalence in the book than just this finding of a pure, you know, of a pure moment of grace and love. It's just what I wanted.
I don't think they're contradictional, you know, I mean, you can have you can have a lot of ambivalence and still have a moment of sublime happiness. And especially when you're left alone, when your partner is gone, and you don't have an echo chamber, or you don't have somebody to brainstorm with. I mean, who is she talking to? She's talking to a gravestone. Alex doesn't answer her. She cannot talk to her mother. Maybe she can talk to her sister, but her sister is so far away. I mean, her sister is in another world now.
She doesn't.
Yeah,
she doesn't even have Alex's trumpet.
Right.
Alex's predator mother took the trumpet before anyone else could get it.
Right.
And yeah, it is ambivalent. I understand what you're saying, Gordon, because I got to the end of the novel and said, "Damn, he didn't live."
Right.
You know? And of course, you realize you don't have a story if he lives. You know, then there's no, you know, there's no drama in the whole thing. It just kind of peters out. But you are left, you know, because it's left unresolved. What's she going to do next? He has multiple options. It's not just a bipolar option of raise the kid as an Arab or raise the kid as a Jew.
But
it's also the option of raise the kid, period.
I see both Jerry and Susan have their hands up, but
yeah,
I'm left with the question of whether Mary is happier at the end because she's been forced back into her, she's receded back into her identity on its own terms, or whether Huda is happier in the end, but because she's all alone, right? I mean, she's all alone. Anyway, that was my only comment.
Yeah.
Before I let Jerry talk, I just wanted to mention that I think by now you all know why the family has to be Christian, because the book ends with the Lebanon War. And I may want to remind you that there was some kind of a tentative, really strange relationship between Israel and the Christian in Lebanon. Anyway, Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you call it strange, but if I recall, Israel let the Christian militia massacre Arab Muslims.
They're just the beginning, and then Israel left the Christian on the run, and they were attacked by the Muslim after Israel withdrew from Lebanon. Yeah.
But first, I take your point that at the very end, Huda indeed is in control, which I guess is a feminist view, right? Whether to have a child or not. But at the very end, I was very depressed because not just because Alex died, but at the very end, because it does seem like at one point Huda has the money from the investment, so that may decide the matter, meaning I could raise the child if I choose. But then at the very end, it's pretty much like, what's the point? If I raise him as an Arab, look what'll happen. If I raise him as a Jew, he's just going to go off to another war in 18 years and die there. And the very last line, right, is Adina being tense and in a rush because her son might call, right? And it's kind of like Huda's saying, you know, what's the point of children almost? I was like, oh man, you know, anyway, that was my impression of the last line.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. And it comes in such a contradiction to Mary, who all of a sudden found her happiness and her life in nursing a baby. Remember the scene like 2 chapters before that, one chapter before that. Susan, please.
Very much following what Jerry said, in that it seems like it perpetuates itself. This next generation will face the same challenges and risk of life in the same battle. But that we're surrounded by history, that the old lady is using the bucket that her kid played with as a child on the sand, that the mother is remembering the cousins by the photographs of them, Hassim or Hissam, I can't remember, they confuse.
Yes.
as you know, as a young child, that the history comes with you, and the personal toll seems to be something that is worth it. You know, that these are the connections that are meaningful for you, even if they're ones that don't persist, that they're so deeply ingrained.
Thank you. Kyla, please.
Kayla, you're muted.
Yeah, unmute yourself.
It's even worse than all of these options for her, because we know that she will not be accepted by Israeli Jewish society to raise this child as a Jew. She will not be accepted by her family to raise this illegitimate child by a Jew. And I kept thinking, do what all the other Christians in Palestine have done. Go to America. Go somewhere. You got to leave this. You cannot live. She's put herself, I mean, the only comfort she will have in life is that child. And she will have no ability to raise that child happily in that society. And it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Kayla, can you now write the sequel to this for Sunny,
Oh, God.
in which she goes to America because she's got this money that Boaz invested
She's got
for?
the money. That's the deal. She's got the money and she's got the baby. And she's got to make a life.
Speaking of sequel and of intertextuality, Sami Michael wrote a semi-sequel to a book called Return to Haifa, which was written by George Kafani, who was the head of the what's the name of that group in Lebanon? I'm blocking the name. One of the Palestinian fighting group, one of the extreme fighting groups.
Not Hezbollah.
No, way before Hezbollah. Okay. It will come to me. I can send you guys there. And it's called Pigeons in Trafalgar. I think it was translated into English. You guys should read it. And again, I mean, living in Israel, being a parent to a child who goes to the army is a horrible position in life. And on the other hand, you have the mothers of the Arabs who are either killed or are considered terrorists because they killed Jews, and they're still mothers or fathers. It's an untenable situation.
Gordon has his hand up.
Yes, please, Gordon.
That was a mistake.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So we're done. I mean, unless you want to have a comment or question or something. Thank you all for joining Luther and me.
What are we going to read next year?
What do you want to read? I mean, Karen asked to read all the rivers.
We read that with the Adat Shalom book group that Charlotte runs.
Oh.
Okay. Well, Charlotte, she was here before. She left. Yeah, she left. We can still do it, Susan.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
I'm just poking you. I want to make sure you're going to do it again. That's all.
Oh.
And truly, it's so wonderful to listen to you. Learn so much.
Thank you.
I was going to say, I have to talk to the powers that be, but actually one of the powers that will be, is here. It's Gordon.
Oh, okay.
I would not necessarily classify myself as a power, but I should be responsive to any interests.
Yeah.
What is your power that we're talking about?
He's the chair of
Israel Connection?
Israel Connection.
Okay.
But please, please suggestions, because the more programs reflect what people want, the better chance I have of actually getting them on the agenda.
The thing is, we don't necessarily know what are the best Israeli novels, especially which ones are translated to English.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
can
what
know, I can always, I
need
can
Kaya to do this.
brainstorm and I can bring a few books and
Yeah.
Gundar,
and I apologize again about the book from last time because I only see the translation like a day or two before the class when I look at the pages, so I know what to tell you. So at least this translation seems to me like being reasonably. It's stiff at times, but it's quite reasonable. It's nothing like the last.
Move your hand.
Any other comments?
Thank you very much.
Keep up the good fight, Chaya. I don't think the reasons you stated are the reasons